Welcome to Mystery Mondays. I know it's a little dark in here when my son's is about to go to bed, so I don't have my other light on. Sorry about that. Please subscribe, hit your like button, and as always, feel free to comment. Today, I will be discussing the 7 final cold cases of missing persons within United States national parks. I will be discussing, I'm sorry, I will not be discussing more recent cases or reflecting on previously discussed cold cases, except that of Jane Doe, as I honestly feel she may be Stacey Anaris, whose full case I will be discussing today. I discussed the one of Jane Doe last week, and this week I'll be discussing the one of Stacey Anaris. I will also be talking about recent information concerning the case of Robert Bobby Bizup, whose cold case is um, the oldest known of in the United States national parks. I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. I haven't been sleeping well and don't have a regular sleeping schedule and whatnot and the other, but that's not what I'm here about. Though it does seem like there was something else I was going to say. Oh, yes. I'm really sorry. I'm trying to do these at 11 o'clock, and I had thought maybe I would pre-record, but we had me and my children, with the exception of my oldest daughter, who does not live in the same state as the rest of us. We had our Thanksgiving dinner holiday here in America Saturday, so I didn't have time to do all of my research until earlier today. Not all of it, but I mean, I finished it up earlier today, so I'm running a wee bit late. The first case I'm discussing today is that of Thelma Pauline Polly Melton, who was reported missing on September 25, 1981 in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Polly was a 58-year-old white woman who was 5 foot 10 inches tall and weighed 180 pounds. She was a tall woman, big woman. She had brown hair, she had brown eyes and red hair. She was last seen wearing a pink and white blouse. Again, I'm giving what the items were that the people were wearing and had with them, so that if someone finds something they believe might be that item, they can let the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch know that information. But yes, she was last seen wearing a pink and white blouse, tan slacks, low-cut tan shoes, and eyeglasses. They were really big eyeglasses. A little bigger than the ones I'm wearing, but not much. Polly was last seen hiking on the Deep Creek Trail. She had been with companions who lost sight of her as she walked ahead at a quicker pace. So she was outstriding everyone, most likely because of her height. And I put in my description for the video the information about what to do if you do find an item, as well as the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch's tip line phone number, which you can call or text if you think you have found something or you have information concerning a case. And I also included their email address. So as I said a while ago, I talked some about the case of Stacey Anaris last Monday in relation to the Jane Doe case because I feel their descriptions are similar. I will now discuss her case in greater detail. She was reported missing in Yosemite National Park on July 17, 1981. Stacey was a 14-year-old white female who was 5 foot 5 inches tall and weighed 120 pounds. She had blonde, shoulder-length hair that was naturally straight. She was last seen wearing a white pullover windbreaker, white jersey blouse with a square neckline and lace trim, shorts with vertical half-inch maroon and white stripes, and intermittent sky blue pinstriping. She was also wearing gray hiking boots with a rough outer leather and Vibram soles. I'm not sure what Vibram soles are, but I'm guessing they're something that was common on hiking boots in the 1980s. She had a gold tone anklet and a retainer on her top teeth. Stacey began a 4-day trip with her father on the High Sierra Loop at Tuolumne Meadows. They were part of a group of 10 people who rode mules to the Sunrise High Sierra camp. The group arrived at the camp around 3 p.m. on July 17, 1981. Stacey settled into her cabin and took a shower. Then she began a 1.5-mile hike along the trail to Sunrise Lakes. She planned to hike with a 77-year-old man who was part of the group she had rode to Sunrise with. Before they made it very far, however, the man grew tired and sat down to rest because he was 77 years old, right? The guide who had led the mule ride was working at the corral and noticed Stacey standing on a rock about 50 yards south of the trail. This guide was reportedly the last person to see her. I still feel like the remains that were found I still feel like the remains found in the park in 1983, which I believe were found about 14 miles from where she was last seen. But as I said, she's a 14-year-old girl. She's got a lot of energy. She could travel that far of a distance in not much time at all, probably, especially if she got turned around somehow, or animals may have carried her bones to the area in which they were found. Those remains have not been identified yet. I believe that they could belong to Stacey, and I'm curious whether any DNA was extracted from those bones, so that like they could compare that DNA to her DNA if they have her DNA on file anywhere, which I know was not a common thing in the 1980s, so they may not. The next cold case is that of missing park ranger Paul Braxton Fugate, who went missing in, I'm going to say this wrong, I know, so I apologize for that. He went missing in Chiricahua, I believe it is, National Monument, which is a park, on January 13, 1980. He was 41 years old at the time. It has now been nearly 42 years since he disappeared without a trace. He had gone for a hike. I think this was so that he could check on the areas within the park that he was required to check on routinely. I believe I saw a documentary about this case that I'm pretty sure that was what he was doing. And they tried to get him on the radio because he didn't check in at the next point that he was supposed to go to, and he didn't answer the radio. So they pretty much immediately started looking for him, if this is the case I'm thinking of, and I'm pretty sure that it is. The National Park Service has a $60,000 reward fund for information concerning his case, and this is because about 4 years ago, I believe it was, yes, about 4 years ago, the National Park Service and Cochise County, Arizona Sheriff Mark Daniels renewed their request for help from the public due to new information, and this was when the $60,000 reward came about. Before that, it had been $20,000, but they raised it to $60,000 because of this new information that they had got. On the date of his disappearance, Paul had been working in the Monuments Visitor Center in southeastern Arizona. He left the building at about 2 p.m. on January 13, 1980, to hike a park trail and was never seen again. And as I said, I'm pretty sure he was hiking the trail to do routine checks on the park that he had to do every day to make sure that everything was okay within the park. Ranger Paul Fugate was wearing his green and gray Park Service uniform, including the official NPS arrowhead patch on his upper shirt sleeve and a gold-colored ranger badge pinned over his heart. Search teams combed the surrounding area extensively multiple times, but found no sign of the missing ranger. Early on, investigators suspected foul play in his case. A formal missing person case remained open a few years back, but once more, Paul's case has grown cold due to lack of information. As I mentioned earlier, the National Park Service is now offering a reward of up to $60,000 for information leading to Paul's whereabouts, and or the arrest and conviction of whoever is responsible for his disappearance. So if you decided to just leave the Park Service, Paul, and you're out there somewhere, I guess you would qualify for that reward. I don't really think that's what happened. I'm like, from watching the documentary, as I said, I'm pretty sure this is the same case. They would talk about how it's not like he could have just had an accident, or if he did have an accident, he would have used his radio to call, and they would have found his radio somewhere, and such as that. But like rocks change, twigs fall, anything realistically could have happened. He might have been attacked by a bear, a mountain lion, who knows what may have happened to him. Hopefully, eventually we find out some information about what did happen to him. Might have stumbled upon someone's pot patch or, drug farm or something that they had within the national park, because people do that. So I hear. I don't know for a fact, but that's what I hear. The next case is that of Teresa Trenny. That's Trenny Gibson. I've never heard that name before. It's her nickname. She was reported missing on October 8th, 1976 in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Now, this one I think contains all of the ones that the missing persons cold cases within the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, except for the one that occurred in 2012. These other ones are quite a bit closer together. Trenny was a 16-year-old white female who was 5 foot 3 inches tall, weighed 115 pounds, had brown eyes and brown hair. She was last seen wearing a brown plaid jacket, a blue and white striped sweater, blue jeans, and blue Adidas shoes. Trenny was last seen hiking with a high school group from Knoxville, Tennessee. She disappeared as the group hiked back from Andrews Bald Trail to the Klingman's Dome parking area. And I was looking at these ones in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, comparing them, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute. The most, not counting the 2012 one, the most recent one was the one I was mentioning a while ago, of Pauline Melton, who was 5 foot 10 inches tall and 180 pounds. And my thought on it is, the first one was a little boy, this one is a 16-year-old girl, and then we have Polly, who's 5 foot 10 and 180 pounds. So I'm thinking perhaps there was a serial killer in the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. I don't know for a fact, but I'm thinking perhaps there was. And the serial killer was maybe a teenager, or maybe timid about killing people. And as they grew older and felt that they were stronger, they killed older people. Of course, Polly was also 58 years old, so given her age, she might not have been as resilient and strong as her size indicates that she could have been. So the next case I'm discussing is that of Dikran, and I am so sorry if I mispronounced his last name. I believe it's pronounced Knadjian. It's Knadjian. I believe that's pronounced Knadjian, who went missing in Yosemite National Park on July 24, 1972. Dikran was a 20-year-old white male of Armenian descent. I guess Ukrainian. I was pretty close, but he's of Armenian descent. He was 5 foot 11 inches tall, weighed 182 pounds, had brown hair and brown eyes. A lot of these people that go missing in national parks have brown hair and brown eyes. I don't know if that's just a coincidence, but it seems that that's the case. When last seen, Dikran was wearing, it only tells 2 items that he was wearing, which I guess are items that stood out to someone who had seen him shortly before he disappeared. But he was last seen wearing a white metal Omega Seamaster wristwatch and carrying a Pentax 35mm camera. He was last seen in the Curry Village in Yosemite Valley on July 24, 1972. Seems to be an area where a lot of people are last seen. I don't know a whole lot about national parks, so I suppose there are some ravines around that area that are probably pretty dangerous, and I know there are a couple of creeks in that area I have discovered during my research. Unfortunately, this is the only information listed on nps.gov for his case. I plan to do some research into all of these cold cases, though, so I can find out if there is other information elsewhere that may help with their cases. Um, and Dikran's case and Trenny's case on this one are the ones that had the very, very least amount of information, which was not much at all. Though actually this next one might actually have less, now that I think about it. So the next one is the case of Dennis Lloyd Martin. On June 14, 1969, Dennis Lloyd Martin went missing in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. He was a 7-year-old white male, 4 foot 1 inch tall, 55 pounds, had dark brown eyes and dark brown wavy hair. Another brown-eyed, brown-haired person, you see. Dennis was last seen wearing a red t-shirt, green pants, and low-cut Oxford-style shoes, which probably means they were black and white because that's what Oxford used to always be. Dennis was last seen playing with other children while on a family outing with his parents at the Spence-filled area of the Appalachian Trail. And so that is literally the only information that the NPS.gov website has listed concerning Dennis's case. Now, I had watched a story that was about several young boys who went missing in national parks. Bobby Bizup was on it. Dennis Lloyd Martin was on it. The thing that I watched, I was thinking the other day, mentioned stuff about UFOs. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. But and I thought I listed this information here, but I guess that I didn't. But anyway, there was somewhere I wrote down the exact amount of time that there was. Oh, it's in the back of the notebook. I'm so sorry. It's going to make me take forever. Hopefully not. But yes, here it is. So between when Dennis, I don't want to get his name wrong, when Dennis Lloyd Melton went missing, between his case and the time that Teresa Trenny Gibson went missing, there was 7 years, 3 months, and 24 days. Between when Teresa Trenny Gibson went missing and when Pauline Melton went missing, there were 4 years, 11 months, and 17 days. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the 2012 one, that was about 30 and a half years, and that was a young man. So I think if there was a serial killer in the Great Smoky Mountains, his is obviously not related to the others because the person wouldn't have become so strong that they're like, I can take down this man, you know. I think he's one of the ones that probably got washed away by the waters. But to me, it was really odd. As I said, you know, Dennis Lloyd Martin was a 7-year-old boy. Teresa Trenny Gibson is a 16-year-old girl. And of course, Pauline Melton, as I said, is a 58-year-old woman. So to me, it seems like perhaps there was a serial killer living out there or visiting that area regularly. And they progressed from a 7-year-old boy, you know, like say they were 16 years old when they killed him. Then when they killed the 16-year-old girl, they'd have been about 23, right? And then when they killed the 58-year-old woman, they'd have been about 27, 28 years old. To me, that kind of makes sense, but it could not be the case. But that was my thought on that, is that it kind of, given the fact that they are fairly close together and all in the same area, it's very possible that perhaps there was a serial killer involved in their murder or their disappearances. We don't know for a fact that they were murdered, but in their disappearances. They could have slid down the side of a hill or ravine or something and slid into a cave, for all I know. But that is my opinion on what one of the possibilities is. So the last case I'm discussing, which has a lot of updated information, well, quite a bit of updated information anyway, and has quite a bit of information to start with. So this is going to take a little bit of time. But this video should not be more than probably 30 to 33 minutes, I don't think. The last case I'm discussing today is the oldest on the National Park Service's website and the final case on their list of 29 cold cases within national parks in the United States. As a reminder, the National Park Service considers cold cases of missing persons to include not only those of people who are still missing, but also those of accidents or crimes which occurred in the national parks, that have yet to be solved and have no active leads. So it's not only the missing persons cases, it's also accidents and crimes, crimes such as murders, that have not been solved and have no active leads. And I mentioned that here because I was pretty sure that this case of Robert Bobby Bizup is one such case where remains were found and it is possible that he had been murdered. And I'll get into that more here in a minute. Sorry I'm doing this so late at night. I hope people watch it and like it and subscribe and all of that. Sorry, I lost my place in my notes here. According to the National Park Service.gov, the case of Robert Bobby Bizup, who was reported missing just outside of the Rocky Mountain National Park on August 15, 1958, has no known suspect or suspects. As I mentioned last Monday, and I mentioned just here a minute ago, in my blog, I found updated information on this case, which I will be talking about. The National Park Service website honestly seems as though it hasn't been updated in at least 3 or 4 years, though the most recent case was added in February of 2019, which is interesting because there was information concerning this case and possible suspects near the end of 2019. But I don't know how often they update this website. They can hire me to update it for them. I mean, I could do that from home. Just help me, be able to do so. But so this is part of why I plan to research each of these cases further. And I had seen his name on paper that I had written names on about the cases and was thinking that I had already discussed this case. And then I was like, wait, no, that's the oldest one. I haven't discussed that case yet because I know what that case is about. But I had already Googled it, thinking that I would discuss it as my third, more recent case last week. And I was like, no, this is not a more recent case. This is the oldest one. And anyway, I found all of this information at that time, though. So Bobby, as a lot of people know, was a 10-year-old white male who went missing from Camp St. Malo in Estes Park, Colorado, which is right next to the Rocky Mountain National Park. Bobby's remains were located within the park boundaries in July of 1959, and I found later in another story that they were actually found on July 3rd, 1959, but not turned over to authorities until July 6th, 1959. Are you okay, Dana? He said, my ears are itching. The cause, nature, and circumstances of his disappearance and death were never definitively established. And this is per the NPS.gov website right here. It says, the cause, nature, and circumstances of his disappearance and death were never definitively established. And I said, though more recent information concerning his case, which I am going to discuss, may actually explain these things to a degree, and it does somewhat. The location his remains were found at had been searched at the time of his disappearance by military personnel, local police, the National Park Service, and other resources, including an Indian tracker and bloodhounds and Bobby's parents and other family members. However, nothing was found at that time. At the time he disappeared, nothing was found. A year later, almost a year later, miraculously, his remains were found, along with clothing and his hearing aid. Okay, so I think this is from another source right here. Yes, it is. The National Park Service Investigative Services branch, of course, opened an investigation. Oh, no, I'm sorry, this is from the National Park Service.gov website here. And it says the National Park Service Investigative Services branch, of course, opened an investigation into Bobby's death. Well, actually, it didn't say of course, I said that because he was missing near a national park and his remains were found in a national park. So when his remains were found in the national park, they opened an investigation into his death, which they might have before that since he was so close and the park was being searched for his remains. So now there is new information about his case that I came across last week, as I said. This information is from November 17, 2020, December 3rd, 2020, which I think the December 3rd story that I found is echoing the November 17th one, basically, and May 27, 2021. Most of this is from News 9 in Denver, Colorado, is where most of this information comes from. The camp Bobby was at when he went missing was for Catholic schoolboys, Camp St. Malo. The camp burned down in 2011. Then a major flood swept through the property. Someone trying to tell someone something, right? Property burnt down, and then a major flood swept through. And they decided that the property was too unstable and permanently closed the camp, though it is still open as a visitor center, like a historical place, which I'm sure traumatizes a lot of young boys due to what I'm about to tell you guys. But the camp I actually read, which I didn't put in my notes, I don't think, but I actually read that the camp was closed in, I believe it was 1984, and then was reopened as a co-ed camp for about 10 years or so, if I recall correctly. So more information on Bobby. When Bobby was born, his dad, I believe, was in the Air Force. He was a fairly high-ranking official in the Air Force, and his mom was a stay-at-home mom. And when Bobby was born, he was almost completely deaf. So he used sign language and read lips, and he couldn't speak very well because, of course, he didn't hear very well at all. And so whenever he would get mad, it was harder for him to communicate with people, is what his family has said. In 1957, he attended Camp St. Malo for the first time. Activities at the camp were overseen by young men who planned to enter the priesthood. Thousands of young boys visited the camp while it was in operation. Activities at the camp included shooting, which they should have done to the people that were molesting them, just saying, boxing, mountain climbing, and swimming in a very cold swimming pond. That was according to one of the young guys who had gone to the park, or possibly even two of them. I think they might have interviewed. In one of the stories, it was an actual video that I watched on the news thing. My dog is distracting me. I am so sorry. By 1993, rumors and reports of child sexual abuse at the camp had arose. One victim reported he was abused between 1954 and 1958 by a man with the last name Abercrombie. This victim's parents were friends of this man, so he had access to their child regularly. He abused the child many times over several years. The abuse took place at Camp St. Malo in Abercrombie's trailer in Estes Park, in his trailer in Estes Park, and in the rectories at Hugo and Roggan, which are two small towns in Colorado, as well as in the victim's home. His report of abuse was made to the Denver. Oh my gosh, I cannot speak. His report of the abuse was made to the Denver Archdiocese on July 9th, 1993. And my thought on that was, okay, so this kid either stopped going to camp, convinced his parents that he didn't want to go or that he shouldn't be going, or maybe even told them at the time what was going on and they stopped sending him. So someone chose to abuse Bobby in his place, possibly. Most likely never know. Um, but so the story goes on to tell that two other priests who had ties to the camp going back many years were said to be child sex abusers. Both had been counselors at the camp for years, even the year Bobby disappeared from the camp. So these three guys training for priesthood were all three at the camp the year that Bobby disappeared, working as counselors at the camp. According to a news story, there have been at least three priests who were working at Camp St. Malo the summer Bobby vanished who are now known to have sexually abused children. Neil Hewitt, one of the three priests, was one of the last people to see Bobby alive and is the person who found Bobby's remains nearly a year after he disappeared. So then I haven't mentioned all of their names as of yet, but before I forget, I want to mention this. I did a little bit of math based on when they were born, which I had to look up. One of the priest's last name was Rapola, and in 1958 he would have been he would have been 21 years old in 1958. One was Harold Robert White, who would have been 25 in 1958, and he is now described as one of the most, or as the most prolific child sex offender in the Catholic community. This man is, and he was at this camp the year that Bobby went missing. And the other is the man I just mentioned, Neil Hewitt, who would have been 22 years old in 1958. And I'm like, if this abuse was going on for so far back, I'm sure that these poor young men were sexually abused by somebody before they abused other kids, which does not make it right in any way, shape, or form. But I'm sure that that was the case. And this is probably going to take me at least 40 minutes. I'm so sorry, guys. But a probe by the Colorado Attorney General in October of 2019 named 43 priests who had abused at least 166 children from 1950 to 2019. And the further looking into it, which went up to, I believe, this year, added, like it went up to like 52 priests, I believe it was, and 212 children that have been abused by them. Due to all of this information, investigators began to look at Bobby's case once more, sadly, because, they're going, well, some of these counselors later became priests, or maybe even priests who were at the camp at the time, probably maybe had something to do with his disappearance, tragically. In August of 1958, 10 days after his disappearance, so it would have been August the 25th, the search had been called off and his disappearance and death were ruled an accident, which I find strange, I said. But then it kind of explained, it says they figured he wandered off, got lost, and succumbed to the elements, which died from exposure. And it explains a little bit more about that later on, about why they believe that he got lost. Excuse me, I have the burps. In 1959, as I stated a while ago, Neil Hewitt was leading I stated that he was one that found the stuff, but Neil Hewitt was leading a hike up Mount Meeker when he found a piece of clothing and a bone. I'm going with supposedly. Okay. A new search started, which led to more clothing, bones, and Bobby's hearing aid being located the next day. So those things were found the next day. Bear in mind, this area had been thoroughly searched the previous year. As I stated a while ago, that search included an Indian tracker and bloodhounds, and it also included more than 500 people who were searching airplanes and all that sort of stuff. And shoot, I forgot I was going to say something. Oh, yes. According to the story that I was getting this information from, the day that Hewitt found this piece of clothing and this bone that led to the larger search that found all of these bones and stuff was his 5th day at the camp that season. So I'm going, I mean, that would have given him and these other counselors plenty of time to toss the bones out there so that they could suddenly be found, you know, just my personal opinion, or anyone for that matter, time to throw them out there so they could be found. So after these bones and this clothing and his hearing aid had been found, they ruled his cause of death as probably from exhaustion and exposure, as I said, a little bit more information on that, and classified it as an accident. Now, this is from a different story here. In early 2021, a skull believed to belong to Bobby was turned over to federal authorities by Dr. Tom McCluskey, who said his father had originally had the skull. And this story is from May the 27th of 2021. This is that story. And the skull was turned over earlier in the year than that, I believe. Something that I saw said possibly the end of January or middle of February. That should look into when they did the documentary concerning this, because that was what led to the skull being turned over. Dr. Joseph McCloskey was the father of Tom McCloskey, and he was a prominent member of the Catholic Church and a close friend to the priest who ran Camp St. Malo when Bobby disappeared. In May of 2021, DNA testing was underway to confirm if the skull is actually Bobby's. Joseph died in 1980, and Tom got the skull a couple of years later, which made me wonder why he waited so long to turn it over to authorities, and then I kept reading the story and found more information out. Tom claims all his father ever told him about the skull was that it might be the skull of a boy who disappeared from the camp, but he could not recall his father's exact words concerning the skull. Because I mean, this was like 2021, and he got it after his father had passed away, and obviously he knew the skull was at his father's, and his father had talked to him about it. Possibly because they're both doctors, and maybe he asked his opinion concerning some things that had to do with the skull. He also claims he tried several times to identify the boy and find news stories about the disappearance. I truly wonder why he did not seek this information from the authorities, who would have had the information, go to the police and be like, so my dad said that this skull that he's been holding on to might belong to a boy that disappeared from Camp St. Malo many years ago. And someone at the sheriff's office would probably look something up if they didn't already know and be like, oh my gosh, maybe it's Bobby Bizup's skull, But he didn't do that for whatever reason. He was trying to do the research himself, because I guess maybe he thought his dad was senile when he told him that, maybe. I don't know. He said he was unable to find any information about the boy. Then in late December of 2020, he saw the 9 Wants to Know documentary Mystery on Mount Meeker and realized Bobby was likely the boy his father was referring to. At that time, he turned the skull over immediately to federal authorities. It had been stored in a paper sack in his basement, which is the best way to store human remains from what I recall from my forensics classes, because it helps preserve them better. In August of 1958, the camp director, Father Richard Hester, told reporters that Bobby had been fishing and failed to follow a counselor and other boys back to the main lodge for dinner. And then I said, from stuff that I read, yet Neil Hewitt said when he saw Bobby, he had run off mad because he told him he could not have any more candy. And so this is why they thought maybe he just roamed off, because he got mad because he told him he couldn't have any more candy. So they're like, well, he ran off. and Hewitt couldn't go after him because he was fishing with him and some other kids, and he couldn't leave the other kids to take off after him. So he must have got turned around in the woods and lost when he ran off and died from exposure, is what they were thinking. According to Nine Wants to Know, the story of how he disappeared doesn't coincide with the accounts of eyewitnesses, which includes the account of Neil Hewitt and Richard Heister, who is the nephew of the camp's director and shares his name. Both saw Bobby just before he vanished and described him as being upset before running off. Now that, when I read that, that made me go, well, okay, so like they were both with the boys fishing. That means one of them could have gone after him to try to help calm him down, if it in fact was even true that he did tell him he couldn't have more candy and he got mad, you know. And of course the camp director said he failed to follow them back from fishing and missed, like he wasn't there whenever they went to do supper. And it's like, I mean, maybe that's what somebody told the director at the time, you know, we were fishing, he didn't follow us back. He didn't follow them back because he ran off into the woods mad. I thought on it or stomped off or whatever, you know. He's a deaf kid, go after him, you know. But anyway, Hewitt, as I stated before, was the one who found the piece of clothing and bone. According to NPS National Park Service documents, he made this discovery, as I stated earlier, on July the 3rd, 1959, but Father Hester did not report it to the Park Service until July 6, 1959, which makes you wonder why, 3 days later he reported it. I guess he went up there and looked around and found the skull and was like, oh my gosh, I can't give this to the authorities or something. According to reports, Bobby's skull was never located until, of course, possibly now. The camp director's nephew told Nine Wants to Know that federal investigators told him they believe his uncle was in possession of the skull and gave it to Dr. Joseph McCloskey, which to me makes total complete sense, right? This case is very sad, in part because it seems pretty clear now that Bobby did not just run off mad and get lost in the park. Several counselors at the camp, along with the man who originally started the camp, and I believe Father Hester, who was the camp's director when Bobby went missing, as well as the person believed to have originally had his skull, have been found to have been sexually abusing boys from 1950 to 2019. I looked back over the stories that I had read to try to find out for sure. I am pretty sure that I recall it stating that Father Hester was one of the ones that was accused of doing such, but I couldn't, when I was looking back over it, I was really tired, but I couldn't find that information. And there were several who worked at that camp that were, I want to say that the story at one point says there were 9 men who worked at the camp as counselors who were found to have sexually assaulted young boys between the age of 10 and 14, or most of them were between the age of 10 and 14. And this pretty much came about, the discovery of this, because this one boy accused, and the camp turned their notes and information, like all of their files, over to, or the Archdiocese of Denver did, over to the National Park Service for their investigation. And it's like, dude, y'all knew there was all sorts of stuff going on. Why did you allow this stuff to happen, right? So one of these priests actually had the, whatever you want to call it, he had the, Brandon's saying gumption, audacity. He was a good enough person to be like, I can't be in the priesthood because I'm I'm around young boys too much, and this is not something I should be doing. So he left the priesthood. And that actually was Hewitt that did that. Oh, so the next thing I said in my notes is the fact that Hester gave the skull to Dr. McCloskey instead of the authorities, and Dr. McCloskey chose to hide the skull away rather than turn it over to authorities himself, makes me suspect Bobby's skull showed proof his death was no accident, like a bash in the side of the skull or the back of the skull or something that made it obvious that he did not die from an accident, right? Most people connected to this case have now passed away, but Bobby's young family, I don't know why I said that Bobby's young family, his family members who were young like him at the time that he disappeared and ended up dying, and his friends deserve the truth of what happened to him. He deserves to have justice and rest in peace. As of May 2021, Neil Hewitt was still alive and had left the ministry. As I said, he's the one that did that. I believe in 1980, he left the ministry. And he claims he is innocent of any wrongdoing in connection to Bobby, but has admitted to sexually abusing 9 young boys while he was in the ministry. I don't know that any of them that he admitted to sexually abusing occurred at the camp, but he did admit to sexually abusing boys while he was in the ministry, and he was moved around within the Catholic Church as part of how the Park Service found out that that's what was going on with him. And he was told to seek counseling, which I believe was he did that, and then shortly after that he chose to leave the ministry, and he actually got married. But hopefully a full analysis of the skull will not only tell if it is Bobby's, but will tell the story of how he really died. With that, I end today's blog and wish everyone a great whatever time of night or day it is in your part of the world. Stay safe and stay positive. I didn't have my mouse over here so I can do this, but